Okay, everybody, hello, welcome. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. For those of you who don't know, you are in the Axia Autism Post-Diagnostic Support Group. My name is Sarah Hendricks. I'm one of the diagnosticians at Axia. I'm autistic myself. Hello, welcome, hi. And this group is for learning, for education, for just finding stuff out more about autism, things that can kind of help you out. For those of you who've been before, you will notice an absence of a Linda, who is our great leader. She is not here today. And the Calvin, are you sad? No, Calvin.
Can we get an F in chat?
We should be sad because Calvin is our baker, and therefore Calvin makes beautiful cakes for us in the break. Calvin is absent. We have been to Aldi for cake, so apologies for that. Hello, welcome, come on in, hi. So we're a bit short-handed today, so if I can't talk to you during the break or whatever, then please forgive me. We don't have the minions to help us out and do stuff. We're going to have to do stuff on our own. Hopefully most of you know that we have a talk with Matt around autism and alcohol. Matt and I wrote a book together called, what's it called?
Asperger syndrome and alcohol, drinking to cope.
With punctuation. And what year did we write that book?
2007, published in 2008.
Oh my goodness, how many years ago was that? 13?
13.
At the time, there'd been absolutely nothing at all written about this subject, and even now, I think there's only one other book, isn't there, out there about drugs and alcohol.
Just generally about, substance abuse, yeah.
But it heavily references our work, doesn't it, Matt?
Yeah.
And so the way we did it was that Matt pretty much wrote his story, and I did lots of literature kind of reviews and searches and tried to find if there was any particular link or any evidence or anything like that, really. And Matt and I have done a lot of training together in the past, although not for a number of years or so. So we're a little bit rusty.
So today I was reminded of me being made drunk in 1971 at age 5. So this is Barbarka and this is Carla, and both were friends of my parents with their husbands, and we 7 went to Spain in Andalusia for some vacation, camping. And you know, in Spain you have those famous bodegas. It's like a bar. Well, and my parents obviously were not around, and those 2 nice ladies thought it was a good idea to offer me some of the drinks they were having. I think they were drunk themselves already a bit. Yeah, and you know, those sweet beverages, you don't think they are really that alcoholic. They taste nice. So of course I liked it and wanted more, and the result is me walking around drunk and having to support myself on our car. Yeah, and that was the end of it, of me being drunk. As a kid, of course, I still got in touch with alcohol. My dad had a hidden cabinet where he often took some beverages in the evening. My dad was a functional alcoholic, so during the day he drank a lot of beer And then for dinner, he and my mother emptied a bottle of red wine, and after that, my dad would usually take some drink to relax, as he said when I asked him once. Well, and I wasn't the addict of alcohol, I was the addict of chocolate. And we had another hidden cabinet, and that's where my parents used to store chocolates and biscuits and everything sweet. And of course, I always ate everything what was in that hidden cabinet. And around Christmas, it was tradition to have those. Those are chocolates, and the inside of that chocolate is sugary. Then you have some kirsch in it, or another type of alcohol. I don't remember. So there are at least 4 different ones. So that's how they look like. Inside is the alcohol, and outside is this chocolate powder. And this is all sugary, all sweet. Is what my parents would get around Christmas. And of course, I stuffed my face with it. You can for sure get addicted to the taste, but I always loved the kirsch the most. So I just ate all those chocolates, and because it had alcohol, I would also get tipsy a little. But this still wouldn't make me a regular alcoholic. That was more because it was so sweet and chocolatey, so of course I liked it. And then I had the occasional Baileys. I just took it pure from the bottle that was hidden in my dad's cabinet. But that was actually it. I really didn't like red wine. I am aware that there is a big culture around wine, and my dad was into it too. But for me, yikes, no thanks. My dad tried to make me love it, but he made a mistake. As an autistic, I'm really sensitive to tastes and texture in my mouth, and I just never could stand the smell of red wine. And my dad just wanted to make me like it. It was some kind of weird education on wine drinking. So, because I was a kid, he just put some water in it and added sugar. And that was horrible. It was so horrible. It made me puke almost. But my dad forced me to drink that. But since then, I even hate red wine more. And white wine, no, I just don't like those tastes. And, well, I also tried beer, and that one I liked a little bit more. And it's fascinating how many different beer brands there are. I was more fascinated by all those different writing styles, and I actually collected those, and I tried myself in writing. That was before we have fonts on computers. So sometimes later on, when I got older, I had some beer once in a while, but I just wanted to taste all the beers because they had such nice beer bottles, and I used those beer bottles for my candles. And then I had all those beer bottles in my room, standing around with candles in it. And my dad would tease me because of it. Well, and that was my beer story. Yeah, but then I actually preferred green tea way more because of the bitterness. That's it. Because of my histamine intolerance, I don't drink anyway now that I could. In the cult I was in for over 10 years, we were of course not allowed to touch any alcohol. And right after that, when I left the cult, my friend who was also in the cult, we just decided to go for a beer because we could. But that was actually the last beer. That was in 2012. And since then I have not tasted any alcohol just because I don't need it. However, I sure know that many autistics do depend on alcohol. I use neurotropics for anxiety, and I still get anxiety when I get stressed out. But many autistics use alcohol instead, so they are more capable socially and they are not so anxious. And that's why they never get diagnosed until so much later, because they fly under the radar, getting drunk and being social, so nobody will notice that they are actually autistic, and they themselves also will not notice until they came across some information about autism. So you see, it could have turned out very differently if I didn't have an aversion against alcohol. I could be just as well an alcoholic, because I started out so early liking it because it was sweet, and liking it more because it was chocolate and sweet with alcohol. And well, luckily I didn't go there, but so many others have. So there is a very good video by Sarah Hendricks, and she wrote a book about it also. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, there is this great book by Sarah Hendricks, Asperger Syndrome and Alcohol, Drinking to Cope. and I added her whole presentation about alcohol and autism. It's worth to listen to it, as there is almost no research done except by Sarah Hendricks. Sarah Hendricks was actually the one who inspired me to go for autism diagnosis myself after I read her book on female autism. So since then I feel very connected to Sarah Hendricks, and I sure hope I will meet her in person one day. Well, so let's get to that video on alcohol and autism. And I just came across this one today.
When we decided to write it, I wrote to all of the academics in the field of autism and said, do you think there are lots of autistic people out there who are using alcohol and drugs in order to cope? And unanimously, all of them said, yes, absolutely, we see it all the time, but it would be really difficult to study because people won't tell you what they're doing. A lot of these people, like Matt, wouldn't have been diagnosed. So it was kind of a generally expected thing. And we frequently get emails from people, and I meet people at the clinic, maybe not necessarily to the same extent of Matt's drinking, but certainly people that at some level are using something just to take the edges off life. So alcoholism itself is considered to be at the point where your drinking or your drug taking is causing you problems in some sort. So going out for a few beers with your mates, make a bit of Dutch courage, not really a problem. But if you need to drink in order to live a normal life, or if you are still drinking, even if you're in debt, if your relationship's fallen apart, if you can't carry on your job, then essentially you've got a problem, and that would lead you to be defined as an alcoholic. What we understand in autism is that autism and alcoholism is described as secondary alcoholism. So primary alcoholism is where you don't have any necessarily underlying difficulty, but you just drink and you drink too much and it causes you a problem. Secondary alcoholism is where the alcohol is actually solving another problem. So if you're autistic, and certainly for Matt, as he described, that when he started drinking, the alcohol actually protected him. It allowed him to have a life that he wasn't able to have without the alcohol. So the alcohol itself wasn't a problem at all. It was brilliant. It was the cure. It was the cure for autism, to enable Matt to take the edges off life and do all of these kind of things. It's only when the alcohol itself becomes more of a chemical issue, an addiction, the tolerance level goes up, so you're having to drink more and more and more, and your body can't process it, and your liver and your kidneys all get damaged. That's where the problem starts. So arguably, a small level of alcohol, I'm not recommending this in any way, is really helpful, because even in the general population, people talk about, Dutch courage. They feel about, I just need a little drink to calm my nerves. It's totally acceptable. It's an absolutely expected thing to do. It's not a problem at all. The problem is when that kind of goes on much, much further. So that's what's called either secondary alcoholism or reactive alcoholism. The alcohol is solving a problem rather than being initially a problem in its own self. One of the things that we talked about, Matt and I, when we thought, well, we know a lot of autistic people use cannabis, and that's relatively easy to obtain these days, but hard drugs are a little bit harder to obtain. You've probably got to have some sort of social network. You've got to leave your house, you've got to talk to people, you've got to know where to get your drugs from. It's a little bit more complicated. Whereas alcohol, you don't need to talk to anyone. You can just pop down your corner shop and pick up your bottle of gin. It's totally acceptable, it's not illegal, it's a very normal and easy thing to do. It doesn't cost a lot of money, it reacts immediately, and it doesn't actually likely to kill you stone dead on the first try, whereas obviously if you take some drugs that are not of good quality, that could be a big problem. We know that in our society that actually people who don't drink are perceived as being quite weird. Anybody here not a drinker who gets that? Yeah, quite a lot of you. And that people put pressure on you to drink. Oh, go on, what's the matter with you? That, if you go out socially, you go, oh no, what do you mean? There's a tendency to, it's so accepted, it's so much part of our culture. And as Matt describes, totally reduces social inhibitions, takes the edges off, a little bit of numbness. We also have this media portrayal, all of these adverts on the TV, that all those people that are drinking Baileys and Christ knows what else they're drinking, they're so beautiful and they're having such a lovely time. So it's a very appealing message, I guess. And maybe that's appealing for some autistic people. Oh, I'm going to fit in if I have a drink. This is a way to enable me to have a social life. I can do things. I met a guy this week. He said, yeah, I see my friends every now and again. And he said, yeah, we always have a few drinks. I said, can you remember, and he was in his 50s, any occasion at all that you've ever been out without having a drink? And he couldn't think of one. It was just a normal part of his life. That I said, what about if you didn't drink? And he said, I wouldn't go. So for some people, they don't even think of it as a thing. It's just what you do. That's how I go out the house. I have a drink. That's how I kind of move on. Someone down here, Ostrander, I can't remember who he was, suggested that all alcoholics are individualists and loners with no emotional connection through relationships, finding it instead through alcohol. Think about that. Find your emotional connection through alcohol. No. So as Matt describes, this totally enabled this normal life. Not only the tolerance of social situations, relationships. I remember you saying once that if your wife came up and surprised you and tried to give you a little hug, that when you were sober, your immediate reaction was to want to punch them in the face. That it was that fight or flight, it was invasive. He never did it, it's fine. But that immediate, rather than going, hooray, my beloved is hugging me, it's what are you doing? But with the alcohol, that was okay. And then obviously that makes the relationship better. If your partner's able to hug you, I guess that makes things a lot more comfortable. The more you can access the social arena, the better you get at it. So I think it's often the case that some autistic alcoholics have better social abilities because you've been in those environments comfortably more often and you've just learned how to do it a little bit more. If you're someone that can never get into those environments, then you just can't get the practice to repeat, to pick up stuff, to do all of that.
Plus, my two wives both drank quite a bit themselves.
Yeah.
Whereas Claire doesn't touch it.
Yeah.
Which really helps.
Absolutely,
yeah.
For you, completely.
Well, yeah.
So then I went away hunting around to see if there was any kind of known link between these sorts of things. And what I find out was there's no research into this whatsoever. The only research that's been done, I think, is done by me, and it was tiny, just a few people that I managed to find. And these are a couple of autistic experts that suggest most people with a drink problem have Asperger syndrome, and there are high numbers of autistic alcoholics. What there is a clear link between is autism and anxiety, particularly anxiety around people, and that's absolutely established. There's also a very clear link between alcoholism and social anxiety, and that again is clearly established. There was a big study which suggested, I think, something like 65% of people, non-autistic people or not diagnosed, admitted to rehab have anxiety disorders. So somewhere in the middle of all of this, these people must be overlapping. These anxious alcoholics and these autistic anxious people and these autistic anxious alcoholics, there must be some kind of overlap somewhere. So the key seems to be self-medication for anxiety. That seems to be the reason that most people are drinking and taking substances in order just to make the world feel easier to be around and enable them to cope with all of the effects of being autistic. So autism and social anxiety so social anxiety is people, and for autistic people it's reasonable to be anxious around people because you can't read them very well, they're not very rational, they say things they don't mean, they make jokes without making a smiley face. So there's a definite confusion for a lot of people who are autistic around social stuff because you just don't really know what's going on. So anything that can just make you care slightly less is going to be helpful. I'm not telling you to drink, please. Promise. So alcohol and social anxiety, apparently about 40% of people drink to feel less anxious, and for those of who are drinking because they're anxious, are drinking every day. So it's much more likely to be a regular thing rather than just a social or a weekending kind of thing. And in these studies of anxious alcoholics, they found that they were anxious before they started drinking. Anybody who's drunk a bit here and there will know that weirdly alcohol can help you feel less anxious, but at some point it will make you feel more anxious after you've drunk too much. So it's a kind of double-edged thing generally. And there's a double chance of being an alcoholic if you are socially anxious. 20% of the population with anxiety will become an alcoholic. They also understand, so there's been a lot of research on alcoholic brains, but less so on autistic brains and that combination. So alcoholics apparently can't read facial expressions, and they can't do emotional recognition and reading. They struggle in processing humour. They struggle with theory of mind, understanding how other people think, organising themselves, short-term memory, all of that kind of stuff. They struggle recognising facial expressions and body language and matching those things.
I was going to say
Yes.
that when I worked in bookshops, if a customer asked me to find a book, like in the stockroom downstairs, I could never remember what their face was or who they were. I just couldn't remember. I couldn't remember who it was. So I basically ended up looking at their shoes and remembering what their shoes look like, and I just wander around until I see somebody with the same pair of shoes. And then that was it. Don't know. And also I was told by the second time I was in hospital that by a neurosurgeon that the amount of alcohol I drank had damaged my brain. He said there was no way you couldn't damage your brain. But you might not know it now, but in some time, you'll so I'm not sure if that's part of it or if it's part of being on the spectrum. But it does cause, permanent brain damage if you do it to the amount I did it.
Yes. Alcoholics are said to be not very good at reading non-verbal behaviour, slower to identify emotions, which kind of looks a bit like autism, all of these kind of things. So I suppose the question is were these people like this before they became alcoholics? So were they autistic already, or is it the alcohol that caused this, these differences in the way that they process things? And nobody knows, because you don't go out and test a load of people and then make them alcoholics and then test them again and see what's changed. So you're only looking at people after the event, and it may well be that some of these features are just the fact that these people were struggling to read facial expressions in the first place, which therefore made them anxious and therefore made them feel more comfortable if they had a drink. Nobody really knows. There is no research about any of this at all. Common factors, specifically, are apparently your frontal lobe of your brain are affected by both of these things. And as we said, language processing, decoding facial expressions, social anxiety, and struggling with anxiety and medication. So the problem that autistic people have is that a lot of treatments for alcohol and substance misuse require you to be clean and dry, i.e. not using anything, before you will be accepted into treatment. Which, for an autistic person who is using those substances literally to function, to leave the house, to do normal things, to require that person to be completely bare of those coping strategies means that often these people won't be able to accept that level of help. Essentially, they need to be allowed to, like Matt to some degree, although you weren't drinking when you went into rehab, to be able to access some of these strategies, to kind of slowly allow the new techniques and strategies to overtake that need for the substance and allow one to kind of disappear a little bit. So initially the alcohol is very much a good coping strategy. I mean, it changed your life, didn't it? It enabled you to live a life that you would never have been able to live without it. Massive level of functioning.
That would have known you were autistic if you weren't on the alcohol.
Yeah, probably, yeah. So it ends up masking it all, doesn't it? Yeah. And I suppose because it takes time for the alcohol to become a problem, for your tolerance to build up, then it might well be that there are people out there, and I think we do see them in the clinic, that are older, that didn't know they were autistic because the drink was kind of enabling this sort of life and was managing things. And then at a point in their lives, either the alcohol becomes a problem or they stop drinking for some reason, and it kind of reveals itself. And you're a much more obviously autistic person now, aren't you?
Yeah.
You need to know everything that's going on. Your social life is very much contained. You were a much more normal, in inverted commas, person when you were drinking.
Yeah, and that to stop me from drinking.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to say? Or should we stop for a cup of tea?
Cup of tea.
Cup of tea. Round of applause for Matt. Please, have a cup of tea. I'll get the text out. We're a little bit early to stop.